Hello, and welcome back to the second part of this alternate history scenario on the topic What if Scotland, England, and France united in the 16th century? In the last part, we discussed that how King Francis II of France survives longer than he did in our timeline and has an heir with Mary, Queen of Scots, and the child is named James. Francis II and Mary, Queen of Scots undertake policies of tolerance and stabilization both in France and Scotland, and upon their death, James becomes King James VI and First of Scotland and France. Then, in 1603, he is also made the successor to the English throne. In 1604, with the death of Queen Elizabeth, he becomes King James VI, First of Scotland, France, and England, hence uniting the countries into one under a personal union. In this video, we will cover the reign of King James and a bit of that of his son, Charles, that is from 1584 to 1630. We would also look at how the two of the most important wars in 16th century European history, namely the 80 Years' War and the 30 Years' War, would have played out in this alternate timeline. But first, let me say this, as we are dealing with complex geopolitics and intertwined events, there might be a break or two in the chronological progression. Also, unlike earlier videos, which had a single context laying out how the events unfolded in our timeline, followed by the scenario, this one would be a bit different. I would explain the context and the scenario separately for each war. Also, for some wars, I would narrate up to the point of diversion as the unified context and then explain how, from the point of diversion, events went on in our timeline, and then explain how it would go on in the alternate timeline. So kindly bear with me with these jumps in chronology and confusing wars. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the scenario. In 1584 CE, King James VI and First of Scotland and France comes of age and starts ruling the two nations directly without any regents. An unified Franco-Scottish court is established, and it is decided that the king and the court would stay 1 year each in Scotland and France. Now, thanks to the policies of tolerance and efficient administration under the reign of Francis and Mary, both the realms experienced a good level of stability and prosperity under King James. But around these countries, Europe is in turmoil of complex geopolitical conflicts. Now, let us look at the first major conflict of this period, known to us as the 80 Years' War between the Dutch rebels and the Spanish crown. The domains of the Netherlands were inherited in early 16th century by the Austrian Habsburgs from the Burgundian crown. When Charles V of Spain united the Habsburg empires and ruled over Spain, Austria, the Netherlands, Naples, and was the Holy Roman Empire, his tolerant policies meant that resentments were very low throughout his realms. But when he partitioned the realms between his brother and his son, his brother got Austria and the title of the Holy Roman Empire, while his son got Spain, Naples, and the Netherlands, in addition to some other realms. But Philip II, unlike his father, was a Catholic hardliner and also wanted to centralize the culture and the government of his realms in Spain. This caused resentments among the Protestant majority in Netherlands. In 1565, nobles of the Netherlands, Catholics and Protestants alike, led by William of Orange, who was also known as the Silent Prince, petitioned Margaret of Parma, who was the regent, to stop the religious persecutions. After a long delay, Philip refused to accept the petition. And even though Margaret had reduced the executions, the refusal caused Protestants to go on a campaign of iconoclasm, known in Dutch as the Bleedende Stroom, which is basically breaking religious idolatry from the Catholic churches. The revolt, starting in Utrecht, soon spread far. In 1567, Spain sent the Duke of Alba to restore order, who took over the command and established the Council of Troubles, nicknamed the Blood Council, for its brutal trials. Many nobles were executed for treason and many commoners for heresy. This led William of Orange to flee into exile in the Holy Roman Empire. From exile, with the help of his brother, he launched an armed revolt. Though he conquered a good amount of territory, he was forced to retreat due to the lack of funds. Rebels also had a navy of privateers known as the Sea Beggars. On the other hand, Spain was also facing financial issues, and hence the Duke of Alba started levying the unpopular 10th penny tax on every transaction, angering the Dutch, Catholics and Protestants alike further. Fearing Huguenot invasions from France, Alba stationed most of its troops in the southern provinces of Flanders, Wallonia, and Luxembourg. Earlier, the Sea Beggars had been given safe harbour in England by Queen Elizabeth, but in April 1572, in fear of Spain, she expels them from England. And then, in what could have been a desperate attempt, the Sea Beggars lay siege to the port of Brill and capture it. Following this event, most of Holland and Zeeland declared revolt against the crown, with exceptions of the important cities of Amsterdam and Schoonhoven. In response to this, the Duke of Alba sends a mercenary army under his son Frederick to put down the rebellion. Frederick quickly captures the city of Naarden and Haarlem, in addition to parts of the Zeeland coast. But these victories are short-lived as due to economic stressors, the Duke is unable to pay his mercenaries, and hence the angry mercenaries sack the city of Antwerp and pillage it. Further, due to lack of payments, the mercenaries pillage city after city in the southern provinces of Wallonia and Flanders. These events angered the Dutch populace, and hence a treaty known as the Pacification of Ghent is signed by all the states of Netherlands, and the Spanish military is withdrawn. But with the common Spanish enemy gone, differences start arising between the states of Netherlands once again. The southern states of Wallonia secede from the rebels and form the Union of Arras and declare their loyalty to the Spanish crown. The province of Luxembourg, though does not join the Union of Arras, also declares its loyalty to the crown. As a response to this, the remaining rebel provinces form the Union of Utrecht, but they do not secede from the Spanish crown yet. In 1581, with help from the English, the Union captured the city of Mechelen. Also in 1581, at The Hague, the Plaquet van Wallatingen, or the Act of Abjuration, is signed, which essentially declares Netherlands as an independent country. William of Orange, being outlawed from taking the Dutch crown, invites Francis the Duke of Anjou to take sovereignty over the Netherlands. Francis, who is the brother of King Francis II, is established as the constitutional monarch of the Netherlands. However, Francis didn't have any real power in the Netherlands and was basically ignored by many of the provinces, especially the city of Antwerp. In 1583, Francis tries to take power in the city of Antwerp by staging a coup, but the French army is massacred and Francis flees to France. In 1584, same year when James VI I comes of age, William of Orange is assassinated in his house, and hence the leadership of the Dutch falls into disarray. Now this is where we come to the point of divergence. Both in our timeline and this, the Dutch approached the French monarch to accept the sovereignty over Netherlands in hoping to get French protection against the Spanish. But in our timeline, the then monarch, Henry III, refuses in wake of internal instability in France. Following this event in our timeline, the Duke of Parma, who was the newly appointed regent and also an able general, recaptured many territories in the south and the east from the Union, confining it mostly to the northern lands. In 1585, with the fall of Antwerp, Amsterdam became the de facto capital city of the Union. With more and more cities in the east and northeast falling to the crown, in 1587 the Dutch appealed to Queen Elizabeth to take the crown of the Netherlands. In fear of inciting the Spanish, Queen Elizabeth refuses this offer, but sends soldiers headed by Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, who also acts as the Governor General. Lord Dudley had many disagreements with the Dutch Parliament or the States General, especially on the matter of admission of representatives from the provinces of Flanders and Brabant into the Assembly, as these provinces were not under the control of the Union. And then in 1587, when the English garrisons at Deventer and Zutphen were bribed to defect to the Spanish side, this gave rise to an anti-English feeling among the Dutch, and hence Robert Dudley returned to England. In 1589, the Spanish involved themselves in the French Civil War, and hence taking this opportunity, the eastern lands of the Netherlands were captured by the Dutch Republic. The borders remained almost the same until 1609, with minor fightings on both sides, when both of the sides decided that they needed a time in which to rebuild themselves, and hence a 12 years truce was declared. The fighting resumed in 1619 with the start of the 30 Years' War across Europe. This fighting continued, again without much change in the borders, till 1648, when the Spanish finally accepted the independence of the Dutch Republic in the northern provinces of the Netherlands, and the rest of the provinces came to be known as Spanish Netherlands. Anyways, with that underway, let us see how the events would have unfolded in this alternate timeline. In 1585, the Dutch offer the throne of Netherlands to King James I of France. In fear of directly opposing the Spanish, King James refuses this proposal, but instead presents Henry de Valois, the brother of Francis II of France, to take the throne of Netherlands, and also pledges full French support to the Dutch. In 1586, Henry is proclaimed as King Henry I of Netherlands, and in the same year, Maurice of Nassau, the son of William of Orange, becomes the Stadtholder or the Prime Minister of Netherlands. In 1580, following a succession crisis in Portugal, King Philip II of Spain inherits the crown of Portugal, hence creating the Iberian Union in 1580. This leads the War of Portuguese Succession to break out between the Spanish supporting King Philip and the English and French supporting Antonio, the Prior of Carto, to the Portuguese throne. Even in this timeline, just as in our timeline, the English and French lose because in our timeline they lost not due to inferior numbers but due to lack of organization and lack of leadership. In 1586, the Catholic nobles of France, especially the House of Guise, backed by Spain, attacked the Huguenots and hence spark a religious conflict. But this religious conflict is not as widespread as the wars of religion in our timeline, as a result of the tolerant principles during the reign of Francis II. Nevertheless, the Franco-Scottish army gets indisposed and hence is not able to protect the Netherlands, and so the Dutch ask Queen Elizabeth for help. She sends an expeditionary force under Robert Dudley and signs a treaty between England, France, Scotland, and the Netherlands, which accepts Dudley as the Governor General of the Netherlands for as long as the Franco-Scots are indisposed. Dudley, just as in our timeline, has disagreements over the admission of Flanders and Brabant in the States General and removes their representatives from the council till the states are back into the kingdom. In January 1587, the English garrisons at Deventer and Zutphen are bribed and defect to the Spanish side, and this gives rise to anti-English settlements among the nobles of the Netherlands. By September 1587, the French, with the help of troops from Scotland, defeat the rebelling groups and divert their forces to Holland, and hence the English withdraw. Nevertheless, till 1591, not much happens, except for the fall of Goringen to the Royalist forces. Over at the sea, in 1588, Spanish send an armada of 130 ships to attack England in order to coerce it to stop its involvement in the Netherlands. But the armada is defeated and destroyed in the English Channel by a Royal Navy headed by Sir Francis Drake. In 1589, the English send another armada to capture Galicia and push down to Portugal in order to reinstate Antonio to the Portuguese throne. But this armada also fails and is destroyed. In the meantime, the Dutch National Army, which was composed of mercenaries, is made into a professional army, and the town of Berda is also sieged and recaptured. In 1591, the city of Hulst in Zeeland is captured by the Dutch, and then an offensive into the Itzeel Valley is launched, which results in the fall of Nijmegen, Arnhem, and Zutphen to the Dutch. In 1592, Henry I of Netherlands is married to Countess Amelia of Nassau, the daughter of William of Orange, and the House of Valois-Orange-Nassau, a junior branch to the House of Valois, is established as the Royal House of the Netherlands. Soon after the marriage, in 1592, city of Coevorden falls to the Dutch, and hence the province of Drenthe is annexed by the kingdom. In another couple of months, the cities of Geertruidenberg, Tilburg, and Eindhoven also fall to the Kingdom of Netherlands. By 1593, the cities of Groningen and Rheinberg are sieged and captured, hence adding these provinces to the Kingdom of Netherlands. In 1597, the cities of Gorenio, Oldenzaal, Enschede, and Liegen are captured, and hence the East is consolidated. In 1598, Philip II of Spain dies and is succeeded by Archduke Albert, his son-in-law, and Isabella, his daughter. With new monarchs on the throne, both sides try to negotiate, but the talks fail because the highly overlapping demands make it hard to find any middle ground between the two sides, and hence the war resumes in 1599. A southward push into Flanders is launched, and within 6 months, the cities of Antwerp and Ghent fall to the Kingdom of Netherlands. In another month, Genk, Liege, Maastricht, and Brussels also fall to the kingdom. Also, the smaller independent duchies, principalities, and bishoprics around these cities are also brought into the Kingdom of Netherlands through the methods of either conquest or persuasion, as these independent small states are normally royalist strongholds. By 1600, the cities of Kortrijk and Mons also fall to the Dutch, and Dunkirk is sieged, with anti-Dutch, pro-royalist privateers known as the Dunkirkers protecting the city. Then, with help from England, the cities of Namur, Rochefort, and Malmedy also fall to the kingdom, and the territories of Luxembourg are also annexed. Also, the smaller duchies and bishoprics around these areas are also annexed into the Kingdom of Netherlands, and Dunkirk remains the only Spanish stronghold in the Netherlands. In the later months of the year 1600, the Spanish send an armada to attack the Dutch through Dunkirk. But the armada is blocked in the English Channel by a Franco-Scottish fleet and is forced to turn back. In May 1601, the city of Dunkirk also falls to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Seeing all hope lost, the Spanish finally start negotiations to end the war. In December of 1601, the Treaty of Calais is signed between France, Kingdom of Netherlands, England, and Spain. The treaty recognizes Netherlands as an independent nation and also recognizes the conquests in Indies and the Americas. With their independence achieved, the States General is consolidated and the Kingdom of Holland, a constitutional monarchy under the House of Valois or in Nassau, is established with its capital in Antwerp. Over near the Mediterranean coast of France, in 1600 CE, war had broken out between the Duchy of Savoy and France over the possession of the city of Saluzzo. Saluzzo was an enclave of French territory which was taken over by King Henry II of France after the death of the Marquis of Saluzzo. However, the French claim to the Marquisate was relatively weak, and the Duke of Savoy, Charles Emmanuel I, also had a rival claim. Then, taking advantage of the Catholic rebellions in 1587, the Duke of Savoy annexes Saluzzo into his own territory. But as Scotland France was engaged in the Dutch revolt, this matter remained closed till 1600. In January 1600, King James VI I meets the Duke of Savoy in Fontainebleau and presents him with two choices: either to return Saluzzo to France or to retain the Marquisate but to cede in exchange the county of the Race, the vicarship of Barceloneta, and Stura, Perosa, and Pinerolo valleys. Charles Emmanuel asks King James for some time, then returns to Saluzzo and asks Spain for help, and upon getting Spain's help, refuses the ultimatum, and hence war breaks out between France and Savoy. France quickly overruns Savoy, Assota, and the Principality of Piedmont. The Spanish try to route their forces from Milan through Assota and encircle the French, but are held in a stalemate near the borders. By 1601, the county of Nice also falls, and French and Genoese forces have a joint occupation of the citadel of Mont Milan and the city of Sainte Catherine. Now, even in our timeline, the same events had unfolded and France had occupied most of Savoy. But as France was in a weaker state and as Spain was also involved, France was forced to give up most of its conquests except for some small territories ceded to it. But in this timeline, France is stable and in a stronger state for negotiating, and combined with its victories in the Dutch revolt, it can create more pressure on Spain, and hence most of the Duchy of Savoy is captured except for the Principality of Piedmont. Genoa also gets some coastal ports from the duchy and territories to connect its enclaves earlier in the Duchy of Savoy. The Principality of Piedmont is also removed from the Holy Roman Empire, essentially isolating it, surrounded by French allies. In 1602, King James starts Scottish and French colonization in Nova Scotia and Quebec respectively, and as a response, Queen Elizabeth I also tries to set up New England as an English colony, but fails. In 1604, King James inherits the English crown from Queen Elizabeth upon her death, uniting the three countries in a personal union. A joint Scottish-French-English court is established, and it is decided that the king and the court would stay 1 year each in London, Edinburgh, and Paris. In 1606, English colonies are established in Washington, New York, and New England, and Scottish colonies are expanded up to Montreal. In 1615, England, Scotland, and France intervene on the Venetian side of the Uskok War between Venice, the Habsburg, and the Ottoman Empire. The Venetians win, and the problem of Habsburg piracy in the Aegean Sea is reduced drastically. With this, we come to the next major conflict of this period, known as the 30 Years' War. Here, I would first explain the war, how it unfolded in our timeline, and then propose the alternate scenario. So, without further ado, let's begin with the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War had started off as a religious schism between the Protestants and the Catholics of Bohemia. Basically, after the 1555 Peace of Augsburg, under the rule of King Matthias II, the Protestants of Bohemia had received a fair amount of tolerance. But when King Matthias II grew old without an heir, he appointed Frederick, the Archduke of Austria, as his heir. In 1617, Ferdinand II succeeded King Matthias II as the King of Bohemia and became the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, Ferdinand was a Catholic hardliner and didn't like the Protestant Reformation taking full swing in Bohemia, and hence sent his representatives to Bohemia asking to shut down the Catholic Reformation and commanding his Bohemian nobles to convert to Catholicism. In protest, the Bohemian nobles threw the emperor's representative out of a third-story window in the castle of Prague in an event known as the Second Defenestration of Prague, because, believe it or not, they had done this earlier once too. Even though the representatives survived, King Frederick II was pretty angry and declared war on Bohemia. Looking for allies, the Bohemians offered their crown to Frederick V, the Elector of Palatinate, who was the leader of the Protestant coalition in the Holy Roman Empire. Hence, the Protestant coalition came into war with Austria. In response, Austria formed the Catholic coalition in the Holy Roman Empire with Duke Maximilian of Bavaria as their head. In 1618, Transylvania declared its independence from the Kingdom of Hungary and supported the Protestant coalition. On the other hand, the Dutch supported the Protestant coalition financially. All of this brought Spain also into the war on the side of the Austrians. Bohemians also reached out to other Protestant powers like England, Scotland, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, but they treaded lightly in order to not step on Spain's toes. Even though the English did not support the Bohemians directly, the fact that Frederick V was the son-in-law of King James VI and I inspired thousands of volunteers from England and Scotland to go over to Palatinate and aid them. In 1619, the Bohemians marched to Vienna but failed, and in 1620, the Catholic coalition decisively defeated the Protestant coalition in the Battle of White Mountain, where the Catholic forces was led by the Count of Tilly. Frederick V went into exile and the territories of the Palatinate were annexed by Bavaria. 5 years of localized sporadic fighting continued, but the Protestant coalition was defeated by 1625 and the lands governed by Protestant lords and bishops were confiscated, and hence the Bohemian phase came to an end. The second phase is known as the Danish phase, as it started with Danish intervention in the Holy Roman Empire. King of Denmark was fearful that the Protestants were being prosecuted in the newly acquired lands by the Catholics, and hence he marched into the Holy Roman Empire with a 55,000 strong army, comprising of 15,000 Danish soldiers and 30 to 40,000 mercenaries from England, Scotland, and Denmark. The king, however, did not have any intelligence about the other side and hence did not know that the Count of Tilly and the new general Albert von Wallstein had amassed an army of around 100,000 men and were marching to the north. On the other hand, the English reinforcements promised by Charles I, son of King James, also arrived late because of English intervention in France, and hence Wallstein forces conquered Mecklenburg and Pomeria and captured Hinterland itself, but due to lack of ships could not capture Copenhagen. The stalemate went on till 1629 and Wallstein, fearing a Danish invasion, offered peace and returned all its former lands to Denmark. In 1628, war broke out in Mantua over the succession crisis, with France supporting the Duke of Nevers as the claimant to the throne and Spain supporting the Duke of Savoy as the claimant to the throne. The war dragged on, favoring the French side till 1630, but then in 1631 a hasty peace was made and the Duke of Nevers was made the Duke of Mantua, and the war was basically abandoned by the Habsburgs. The reason the War of Mantuan Succession was basically abandoned was the start of the third phase in the 30 Years' War, known as the Swedish phase. In 1630, with French help, Gustavus Adolphus the King of Sweden landed in Pomerania, which had been fighting the Habsburgs. Then he threatened Brandenburg into giving military access to the forces of Sweden and the rest of the Protestant coalition, and also tried to persuade Saxony to join the war on their side, but Saxony refused. But when the Count of Tilly attacked Saxony, the Saxons joined the Swedish in the war. The Swedes won many battles, especially the decisive ones at Breitenfeld and Rain, and in the Battle of Rain, the Count of Tilly was also killed. But in the Battle of Lutzen against Wallstein, where the Swedes won, Gustavus Adolphus was killed. In 1634, Wallstein was also assassinated on the order of the emperor. Without capable leadership, the Swedish army was defeated in the Battle of Nordlingen and returned. And then, in 1635, the Peace of Prague was signed. This established peace between Brandenburg, Pomeria, Saxony, and the Habsburgs, and basically protected the Protestant kingdoms in North Germany, but failed to do so for the southern kingdoms. Seeing the Peace of Prague as giving too much power to the Habsburgs, France declared direct war on Spain in 1635 and on Austria in 1636, starting the fourth and the final phase known as the French phase of the 30 Years' War. The French also started sponsoring separatist movements in Catalonia and Portugal in Spain's domains. In 1636, the Spanish army marched all the way to Paris but failed to take it, and the war drew on in stalemate. In 1640, the Portuguese Restoration Wars had started and Spain had to withdraw from Europe. Catalonia also rebelled and made itself a principality of France under the leadership of Louis XIII, King of France. Decisive battles were won by the French and the Swedes against the Holy Roman Empire and Spain respectively. But by 1642, both the sides were getting desperate for peace as the war had drawn very long, about 28 years. In 1643, Sweden also declared war on Denmark, and hence Denmark joined the Habsburgs but were defeated. Finally, by 1648, three peace treaties were concluded: the Peace of Münster, the Treaty of Munster, and the Peace of Westphalia. These peace treaties brought some territorial gains to France and Sweden, but also gave Bohemia over to Austria. On the other hand, it also decentralized the Holy Roman Empire, which reduced its status further in European politics. Anyways, now with that wrapped up, let us look at how events would have unfolded in this alternate timeline where England, France, and Scotland would have united. Because, as you can see, the British and French had a major role to play in the 30 Years' War, and hence, a change in their decisions would have made a huge difference in the outcome of the war. The divergence occurs in the second, also known as the Danish phase of the war, because, anyways, in the first phase, England or France did not have direct intervention in the war. So, in 1625, King James dies and is succeeded by his son, King Charles, King of Scotland, England, and France. And shortly after his coronation, the Danish attack the Holy Roman Empire against the Habsburg side. King Christian marches into the Holy Roman Empire with 65,000 soldiers, but on the other hand, General Wallstein has an army of around 90,000. Facing defeat against the Habsburg armies, King Christian turns back and, just as in our timeline, retreats. And Wallstein captures Mecklenburg and Pomeria and pushes up into Hinterland. In this timeline, the English reinforcements are dispatched in time because there is no French intervention, but the Duke of Edinburgh, who is leading the army, in order to prove himself, instead of landing through Hanover as in the pre-approved plan, tries to route his forces through the Netherlands and plans to defeat the smaller Catholic principalities and encircle Wallstein's armies. But he fails and the English army is defeated and forced to return. This leaves the English Parliament to conduct trial against the Duke of Edinburgh, which directly leads to the events of the English Civil War, which will be discussed later. On the other hand, French armies plan to march from the southwest to Bavaria and finally capture Vienna. In 1625, the city of Besançon in the Franche-Comté territory of Spain is sieged and captured by the French, hence capturing the territory from Spain. In 1626, with the fall of cities of Nancy and Metz, the Principality of Lothringen is also captured by France. On the other hand, in the Spanish border, the Kingdom of Navarre, ruled by the Bourbons, declares war on France. Navarre and the Basque Country, which are two autonomous regions in Spain, are captured by the French. In the following months, the cities of Stargard and Tübingen fall to the French, and hence Württemberg is captured. And then the city-states of Ulm and Augsburg also fall, and their territories are captured by the French. The city of Kempten also falls, which leads to the fall of the western territories of the Duchy of Salzburg. By 1627, the cities of Munich, Ingolstadt, and Hamburg also fall, and hence the Duchy of Bavaria is captured, and Duke Maximilian goes into exile into Austria. Over in the north, another British army lands in the north coast and through Hanover attacks Mecklenburg. This leads Wallstein to bring his armies south, and taking the advantage, the Dutch recapture Juntaland. An attempt to encircle Wallstein's army fails, and the English and the Habsburgs are caught in stalemate near Mecklenburg. Over in the south, with the fall of its capital, the Duchy of Salzburg is also captured by France, and the French try to push to Vienna, but are stuck in a stalemate near the border. The war is in stalemate till 1629, but over in England the parliament has been dissolved and hence the king is in lack of funds, and Wallstein, fearing another English army, sues for peace. And by 1630 the Treaty of Nuremberg is concluded. France is given the territories of Franche-Comté, Lothringen, Ulm, Augsburg, Brettenburg, and the western territories of the Duchy of Salzburg up to the river Lech. Over in the Spanish side, it is given the principalities of Navarre and the kingdom of the Basques. Apart from this, there are no other changes in the territory. Among these territories, Franche-Comté and Navarre are annexed into France. The other German territories are made into the kingdom of Baden-Württemberg, and Henry de Bourbon, the third Prince of Condé, is made its king, hence establishing the Condés, a junior branch of the House of Bourbon, as the rulers of this principality. In 1628, Scotland, France, and England also intervene in the War of Mantuan Succession, but the results of the war is same as that in our timeline. By 1932, the English Civil War breaks out between the Parliamentarian Oranges and the Royalist Reds, hence leading to the withdrawal of Scotland, England, and France from the 30 Years' War. The events of the English Civil War and the timeline following it will be explained in the next and the last video of this series. And this is where I'll end this part of the scenario.